Fotis. That thing is my surname, or my surname has many form inputs, would prefer it be. But I don't know why 16. If somebody can tell me why people decided 16 characters is we cut off, I don't know. But yeah, let's make some forms and think about our existence as somebody does on a Friday afternoon, I guess. Some motivation first. On the FIBA team, we have this music playlist on Spotify. It's called the FIBA playlist. I think we've had it for a few years now. We just play it in the room on Fridays because it's a Friday. And I haven't had Spotify for the longest time because they didn't have a web player, and I was like, yeah, okay, I guess I won't sign up. Then I realized at some point a month ago that they do have a web player now, so I thought, I'm going to sign up. Great. And I go to the sign up page, and I get this monstrosity. I don't know if you can see it. Not the page, but the result is that Spotify decides that because I'm in Finland, the site is going to be in Finnish. Pretty okay assumption, I suppose, but still a bit of an assumption. I could not find a language speaker there. If you know where it is, please let me know, enlighten me, but I don't know. I couldn't find it. Now, I do run into this case every so often because, again, I don't really speak much Finnish and I live in Finland, so I need some kind of auto-translate, and I have Google Translate translating things for me. The problem is this beautiful form here, nice and clean or whatnot, it doesn't have labels, and placeholders don't get auto-translated, so basically I get something that's half English and half Finnish, so I get like email address, and then it says confirm email, not email address. The error message is in English because that's like plain text, so that gets translated. Birthday, like month, is in English because it's a value, but the other things are just text inputs. It's great. It's like a bingo of what can go wrong in translating things. I have a password manager, so you'll see I get like a prompt to generate the password. So, okay, now I know that's the password. Great. I'm being a little bit fastidious. Like, I do understand that this is like email, like, and password I have filled in forms before on the web, but still there is something that bothered me. And I will tell you what bothered me. I started my day wanting to listen to music with my friends, and I was being reminded yet again that I don't speak the same language as half of them. I already think about that before I go to sleep at night. I don't need Spotify to remind me of that. Yeah, and form labels, they're good for everyone, right? I use the web on one of the most vanilla ways possible, like keyboard and, a screen. Sometimes I use the keyboard. Sorry, mouse on the screen, sometimes the keyboard. But still, form labels would be very useful for me because that's a valid use case. I want to translate things or auto-translate things. And again, you can think of other ways why the form labels are useful for people. Like if you have a very long form, for example, the placeholders are not going to cut it because there's so many fields. You really need to be able to scan through things. And there's pretty good research as well that shows that. This is a pretty well-known principle. So these are some like 7 design principles, or the inclusive design principles, helpfully in that URL. The one in particular is called consider situation, in the sense that our users throughout their days or their lives, they use our sites in very different ways. Like, if you're holding an infant, then probably you can't like use very motion heavy, like, intricate controls and so on. So, that was exactly the thing I was running into. And I really like another formulation of this by Eric Meyer and Sarah Wafter-Boitzer, which they called stress cases in their book Design for Real Life. In design and development, we took a lot about edge cases, right? Oh, this edge case breaks our system, this edge case, breaks the data or whatnot. But there's no user who shows up to your site and is like, hi, it is I, the edge case. Like, that doesn't happen, right? Like, people are not edge cases. But I really like when they were talking about stress cases in 2 ways. The stress cases that will kind of stress what assumptions you make about your site, but also the stress cases in, you're booking flights to see an ill-loved one. It's probably important to you that you know what you filled out. You might need a passport to go to that country, which means that if you fuck up the name input, you might not get admitted to the country. You're paying a lot of money for that flight, like you maybe want to make sure that, the destinations you're picking are the correct ones and so on. So there are really good reasons, in my opinion, to make sure that users have the information they need. So having said all that, let's make some forms. We're going to make one form, so it's not forms necessarily, but I promise there's more than enough in that single form to cover the basics. This is a form. Wow, a form. It has all the things I like to see in a form, labels in particular. I love labels. But yes, so for instance, okay, how do you add a label to a thing? Might be obvious to you. If it is, okay, I'm happy. There's 2 ways to add a label to a thing. The way I like to do labels and inputs is you have the label and you associate with this for attribute where you put an ID. So if you see here, it says label for equals email, and then you have input and the ID is email, so it knows very explicitly that it's associated with that input. There is another way to do it, which is to put the input inside of a label, which I'm not showing you here, and sort of implicitly that knows that the label is for that input. Um, I'm not a big fan of that because, like, the moment you want to change the markup for styling, it gets a bit unwieldy in my experience. But if you want to use it, then be my guest. Um, One really cool thing that labels do, and I will keep telling you good things that they do, is they increase the tap target. So if you're in a mobile phone and you don't have like the best mobility in the world, uh, if I click on the label, you will see that it focuses the input. And you might not even notice this explicitly when you're like using a form on mobile, but trust me, it has been helping you forever. It helps me at least. So that's like a really nice sort of affordance that the properly marked up labels and inputs give you. Of course, this whole thing goes inside a form tag. It's a good idea to have a sort of heading inside of the form just for like people to navigate to it quickly, but that's kind of icing on the cake in some respects. Email, the email is of type text, which is like just plain text. You can just put things in. Revolutionary, I know. And you will see that I do still have the placeholder though, because the placeholder has an has a specific use case, right? If you want to show what the shape of the data is in a way, it's really nice because it gives users a hint as to what they expect. One example you can think of is credit card details. There's the 3 numbers on the back that you can fill in, like the CVV or whatever it's called. And very often they will show them in the placeholder. And I'm pretty sure it helps a lot of people fill out form details like that. But placeholders are, well, placeholders, not labels. That's why they're called placeholders and not labels, I know. One thing, though, that is a good idea is if you have very complex things sort of in your forms, like passwords, for better or worse, many would say worse, we have various arbitrary requirements on passwords. Those maybe don't put them as placeholder. The idea being that the moment you start typing, of course, the placeholder disappears. So back to square one, what were the requirements again? So you see, in this case, I have done it in one way, is that I just put it in a paragraph tag, and I gave it an ID. I wrote the description, letters, numbers, symbols, chanting an eldritch tongue, normal things we fill in for passwords, I guess. And then the input also kind of has this aria described by attribute that, again, associating by ID, it says that, hey, the description is there. Some would even say you don't even need this attribute in this case because scanning through the form with a screen reader, you'd run into the description. I like to be explicit about it. There's many things to do here, right? Like you thought this was a simple form, but there's already 5 different choices you can make. But it's definitely one way to do it. Again, keeping this idea sort of passwords and stuff, and maybe this is going into more UX things, but it's also good to think about the markup is that if I type a particularly long and interesting password, I want to make sure I can log in afterwards. So having a show password field is a nice idea. The JS for this is not super interesting. You can just find it in the link. And then you have the submit button, which is, in this case, again, 2 ways to do it. One is to have an input of type button, which knows that it's going to submit the form. That's the default action within a form. It takes a name, and the value is the thing that will appear inside. You can also use a button element. The button element is a bit nicer because you can like put arbitrary things inside of it, not just string text, which can be actually pretty nice. And if you put a button, then because it's within a form, sort of implicitly, the action is that it will submit the form. So if you have a button in a form and you don't want to submit, you need to prevent the default action. Go with it, whichever one you like. I kind of like the input type button. It feels very analogous to the other inputs, but that's up to you. Focus states are very important, right? If you have a very long form or if you have many links on your web page, right, you start tabbing through things, then you need to know where you are. And maybe on my good days, I can believe that people don't like outlines on buttons. I really don't know why people don't like outlines on forms. They help everyone, I think, to know that, hey, this is the thing you're filling in, like out of the 50 you have on your page or something. You can do many things with focus states. I just enhance the outline a little bit, make it a bit thicker. If you don't remove them explicitly, the browser will also provide this for you. So, just kind of be intentional about how you expose this to users is my point. And again, sort of another thing you can do is like the input length a little bit. So, if you have a name field and it's like 8 characters long, I'm not going to be too happy to put my name into it, but also it doesn't give you a good visual hint in a way. And similarly, like if you remember of the CVV example in credit cards, you probably shouldn't put it like full width of the container where it's only 3 characters, right? Like that doesn't really match what the user would perceive in a way. But again, that's more like going into the UX side of things. But hey, we're about making good forms here, so why not go into those details? Credits to Adam Silver. I will reference more of his things later for sort of this reduced example. So we've gotten the markup. I want to kind of stress 2 more things. So I told you that adding labels, there's 2 ways to do it. The nested way and the ID way. one thing I have heard sometimes from people is that ID, OMG, why would ID suck? Bye. It's like, why? And I understand that IDs can be, like annoying sometimes because they kind of have to be unique. Like they're also associated with CSS selectors very often that you shouldn't use them or like it's not a good idea and so on. So I think there's a lot of baggage there that goes with IDs. But at the end of the day, that's how you do it. So I don't know. I can complain if I want to. I don't want to, but it doesn't help anybody, I think. And in some ways, okay, making sure that your IDs are unique is like we're engineers, we can work with that certainly, right? You can add the prefix if you're going to be hard about it. You can add the random number. Like I don't see why that's a good reason to say, yeah, okay, I give up. Like IDs, really? Like that's the most complex thing we've built? I don't know. I'm a bit salty about this, but yeah. Anyway, IDs, yeah, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. It's fine. One thing though that I should point out, yes, and I'm happy I put that in a slide because I would have forgotten. People will very often do display none to hide the label. So technically the label is there in a way, but it's display none so the form is clean or whatever the desired outcome is from doing that. Don't do that, because if you display none something, it will not be exposed to assistive technologies. So if even though you want it to visually be hidden, it will be completely hidden to everybody, like even screen readers and so on. There is a very good reason for that. Again, I can see why you might find that default annoying, but consider in design, we often, even though we do responsive design for many things, sometimes we do the adaptive design approach where you conditionally render subtrees of your application, like a desktop menu and a mobile menu, for instance. Usually they'd be separate components. Like even if I tried a lot, I couldn't make them the same one. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that the user will not have to tab through your entire mobile menu before going to the desktop menu. So there is a good reason why this default is there. Like there's big subtrees in our applications that are display none, and it doesn't make sense to expose them. And in general, though, I hope I have shown you that visual labels are good anyway. So it's not just the, being proper and having it in the markup for screen reader users. Yes, they would be the most screwed over if you remove the labels. But trust me, a lot of people would be pretty screwed over if you remove the labels. So maybe don't do it. But if you're inclined to do that, or if you like run into a site that does it, then be aware that you should probably do something about it, if you have the time, of course. Oh, I was actually the other day. I think was it Fastly? I think we were on some page anyway, and I was looking through the markup because they didn't have labels. And I was being me, and yeah, they had the labels, but they were displaying none. I was like, oh, no, that's no. Then I decided, no, I'm not gonna email companies telling them, no, nah. But yeah, and there's more to forms than fields, right? There's error handling and validation. There's error reporting. I put it as a separate thing because I think they're very big areas on their own. And there's also flows. Like there's a big thing that people mentioned on the front end when I asked a few weeks ago. And they said, hey, multi-step flows is really hard with forms. What do? It's like, yeah, it is very hard. Also very interesting in a way, but designing flows is, again, like there are some things to consider there in how you expose things, but I will not be tackling that today. Let's talk about it afterwards, though. That would be very interesting. One thing I will tackle is the part of validation, and sort of an argument I feel that is very important is that when you focus sort of on accessibility or like making sure that your site serves all of your users in their various like situations, it's a really nice prompt to simplify a little bit. So for instance, live validation is something that is very prevalent, or at least most of the sites I have seen tend to do some kind of live validation where you type and you move to the next field and then it complains that your surname is, 16 characters because somebody decided that's the case. Guess who didn't get my money that day? That company. But yes, that's actually a lie. They didn't take my name when I was signing up, but they would take my name when I was going to pay. And then I didn't pay them. Yes, to be clear. So there's a lot of things you can do with live validation, like tracking the state. And it's a complex front-end issue. You need to debounce the input, make sure you don't bomb your API, but there are also complexities there. Like even if you've managed to implement it correctly by some definition of correctly, it's something that you have to maintain, right? And make sure that people maintain. So one silent killer I find in those things is keeping validations in sync. So if you have a mobile app and a web app, and the validations change in the backend, and suddenly you have people being able to register through the mobile app but not sign in the web app. So there is a lot of complexity there that would have been simplified if you didn't go for live validation in a way. Because as far as assistive technology users are concerned, from what I understand and have read, again, I'm not really a screen reader user 24/7, but it's much more preferable to have the list of errors when you submit instead of like constantly being interrupted. And I would advocate for many users as well. But again, I'm not gonna like fight for this. the main question I want to ask is like, what is the intent here? In the same way with the Spotify case, right? What was the intent? They're like, a good intent, right? People would like to be greeted in their own language. The assumption, of course, there was like that the language you speak is the one from the country, but that makes a lot of assumptions about the language in the country. But you can see that the idea is there. And if you take that idea a bit further, it would be like, okay, so would somebody feel more comfortable if they could translate this page to their site, to their language? And would that have led you to add labels? I don't know. And that brings me to the third point, our existence, or our existence as consultants at least. So let's look at these problems from another kind of grouping. So labels look ugly, IDs are bad, can we visually hide something, can we fix it later? And I think all of these are instances of the same issue. Some are examples. It's like a joke PR I made. That never happens. I never submitted that. It's like, we would love for this to be the case, right? Like, oh, I fixed the accessibility here. Here's an accessibility, have it. It doesn't work like that. Doesn't work for accessibility, for performance, for features, for most of the things we do, to be honest. Another instance I had is we're making like this sports site that we do and like have these really complex tables and lists and definition lists or data lists that are called now. And I was like, yeah, there's this problem with the X and Y and Z, and look, we made it accessible. And the client was like, oh, it looks good. I was like, no, it's not just that. But of course, I can't blame them, because if you're seeing 20 sports sites a day and you're browsing with a mouse and the screen, then of course that's going to be the way that you evaluate it by. Like, in many ways, this was my failing in a way, even though I did try to explain the problems up front. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I was a bit bummed. And I was thinking about this a lot. I had this sour thought one day, as one does. There's this class called visually hidden that's very prevalent in accessibility when you do want to hide something visually, but expose it to assistive technologies. There's many various incantations like this. Again, if you have a label and you want it to be translatable but not visually shown, that's a good idea. I don't mean a form label necessarily, but also like a menu label sometimes is a good concern. Sometimes it's used as a patch, sometimes it's used as a very explicit feature. And I was thinking about this and like visually hidden, and those two words would be my best description of what accessibility work feels like visually hidden, because literally the tip of the iceberg is the visuals and the things, and there's all the other thing that happens in the markup. The client probably doesn't open the markup and say, oh yeah, good markup, great. But there is some truth to that, right? And I think the inverse of that then would be to increase visibility. And what I love about working at Futurize is that we challenge our clients, right? Very often our clients come to us because they want to be challenged. And we do that for our design, service design, development. I love, for instance, that with our client right now, we can discuss technical debt. Like for the past month, I haven't written like a single line of code in features. I've only been fixing things because the client said, hey, we've been making things for a year now. Let's take some time. It's the off season to fix it. It's like, yes, thank you. That was great. And I did accessibility work as part of that. So my point is not that we don't do it, but again, I want us to be intentional about this. I want us to be explicit. Like, yeah, let's tackle this. Like, hey, these tables we added? I feel bad that they don't have accessible headers. Can we do something about this? And I do have some concrete ideas I've tried. My favorite one is like writing descriptive issues. In particular, writing the issue as if I don't know who's tackling it. Like, it might be me who will tackle the issue tomorrow, probably not. Maybe in 3 months, likely. And sort of explaining both the problem and what happened. So if we were making those definition lists, we were making them over the summer, actually. And I was working with Jonas, the summer worker. And the thing I was doing there was like, hey, we need to make this design here to implement this, put these pixels on the screen. And here are some issues that you might run into. How do I do this? How do I do that? Here's like 3 things to discuss. Here's 2 things. And like that. And it really doesn't matter that at that point who tackles it, in my opinion. I might tackle it in a few months and I will be, well, yeah, go past Fotis. You left me the instructions. Great. But it could also even be that somebody starts tackling them and they get interested in it. Actually, like Jonas, who's not here. So again, it's not like he can attest to that, but still pretty interested in the topic. And I love that. And it does make it way easier to do the second thing, which is collaborate on tickets with this sort of perspective. Tracking it as a category is also something pretty low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. It's like improvement is pretty generic. I also like to have improvement accessibility and make it obvious that we're doing better on some cases, because it's always about making a best effort, right? You'll never make a, fully whatever, like fully performant, fully accessible, fully anything, in my opinion. And also the fourth thing, which I love, you could consider this presentation part of it, is like share references like there's no tomorrow. If you're interested in something, like it's fine. Go to your team flow, post something, even if they don't have the context. Offer them a little bit of context maybe. if they don't get it but they're interested in it, cool, you got to share something you love. If they get interested in it, even cooler. Like I really think it's important to increase sort of this visibility. Something that has been unsaid this entire time, but I think I should say it. Whenever I rant about accessibility, I always feel like that's like, I'm a nice person, please don't hate me. And I did send that to the team actually like 2 weeks ago, uh, for the same reason that the Spotify thing distressed me so much. Like I moved here a year ago. This is a very big part of my acquaintances actually. It's pretty important to my well-being that I'm not an asshole to these people. You know, consider the situation, right? It works in more than websites. And I do think that it does boil down in a way to being able to let go a little bit and share this responsibility, right? Like, because of course it's nice to have domain knowledge and be the person who can go in and fix all the things, but one person versus five, it's kind of inefficient as well. And it's also like I said, kind of mentally draining. And I do like to focus a bit on propagating the questions in a way, because if you at least know what to ask, you'll find, you'll be able to dig up the references. You'll be able to put the right terms in Google if you must. Or, in the case of Futurize, one of the things I love is being able to ask somebody. Like we have so many people that might be, halfway across, well, Europe actually. Not, I was gonna say Helsinki, but also like we've got other offices. So yeah. And I will leave you with this idea as well, that it's not just being able to make it less mentally draining, but I also think that if you're able to share what concerns you and what you've been struggling with, like, hey, I feel bad that X part of our site is not accessible, is it also allows you to revel in your successes when you do fix that, 5-page issue or something. Because you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, I can see that this took months and was painstaking and has thought behind it, and we can actually share it with each other. Part of the reason I'm here, in a way. Wrapping up with some references, vaguely in order of appearance in the talk. The first one is the inclusive design principles. Really nice, principle, basically, that's what it is. You can even print them and put them on your wall. They're nice to think about. Second thing I liked is this design for real life book. It was really fantastic in asking questions because it wasn't explicitly talking about accessibility or anything like that. It was talking about these very real cases of people having to rush to a hospital, or people having to take a flight somewhere that's expensive and so on. That is really nice, and they're also approaching it both from this both design and development perspective of what do you ask, how do you evaluate your assumptions a little bit. Form design patterns. This book here, it's fantastic. It's like $20 or something, or you can get this. Really cool, very very applicable, very like sign up forms. And things around them. Long checkout forms, what do you learn from there? Flight booking forms, what can you learn from there? Things where the latency is not from here to Australia, but it's like 7 days to get a document. What do you do there with your form? Inclusive components, really nice, both book and blog about sort of approaching patterns and components in accessibility. And one thing I really loved was Marcy Shadon's Being Patient versus Being Loud, where she talks about, it's a couple of years old, the article, by this point, talks about this idea of how do we share in our successes, and like what does it mean to care about something that not many people know about, and so on. She also has like lots of other amazing writing, but yeah, that was my main prompt for this talk. Right, that's been me. Thank you very much.
Questions? All right, thanks for the very interesting talk once again. And I have a question regarding the form validations. So would you have any tips or recommendation on what is the best way to implement error messages, for example, so that it is more accessible to the user? Are there things or pointers that we should?
So the one thing I usually I'm thinking is like think twice before you add the live validation. I think that would be important. It really depends on the kind of thing you're doing, right? If you're doing multi-step things, of course you want to validate every step because then it's very important. I think it would be easier if I could like get into the typing and show you up close afterwards. But I think I would say definitely like think twice with the live validation. Exposing the errors in context, I think, is really good. For instance, near the label is a good idea to do. I have found, because for instance, in one of our sites, we show form errors as models that drop down as notifications. Like I can say that openly. And I really dislike that. Someday I will go and fix that. Like that's not a way to disclose things. But if there is something more specific, let's look at it together, because it's really hard to give very wide advice about it.
It's just one thing that I just came up like from the top of my head, because I always wonder how does that work with a screen reader? If you return a validation error, does a screen reader actually knows that
Yeah, so
which
screen
view
readers
has an error
do. Yeah, that's a common like thought, like question people have. Like I think screen readers do observe changes in the DOM and announce them. There is also markup, the ARIA live regions, that allow you to explicitly announce something that changed, usually in state. Yeah, so you can use that for validations as well. It really depends on the specific pattern. I have seen it done. I can send you. Actually, I'm pretty sure in this book they discuss that, so you can just grab that as well.
Cool. Thanks. I'll check it out.
Yeah, so thanks for the great presentation. So there's no standard way of displaying error messages. There's no like stuff like label that or
Standard in the no, there is no like,
No, like in
form
the-
error HTML element or something. No, but there are patterns. Patterns definitely exist, right? Yes, so those would be the things to seek out in a way.
that's weird.
Yes.
But yeah, I really liked your comments about the live validation because that sucks. In some forms, you like enter one character in the email field and it says it's an invalid email. Like,
Or you keep filling in the forms like your name is invalid, your name is invalid, your name is invalid. It's like I know for whatever that means. It's like,
Yeah, I got a quick question. Do you know any kind of tools out there that could like learn these sort of patterns and based on the common patterns in the community could like link your forms somehow?
yeah, so there are a few things, not just for linear forms, but in general. So Axe Core is really fantastic in my opinion.
What was that?
Axe, like my axe.
Okay.
Axe Core is quite nice. It will catch a lot of low-hanging fruit. Of course, you should always kind of go in and test afterwards. There's definitely a lot of things that have to be done manually and for good reason. But yeah, I really enjoy Axe Core running in SEI, for instance. That's pretty good.
does Lighthouse catch any of these problems?
Yes, Lighthouse catches a lot of. So Lighthouse, I think, uses Axe Core internally, if I remember correctly. So it catches a lot of those low-hanging fruit as well. It's usually sort of questions about, that have to do more about the intent of your design, or like, does the user get the task done, and so on. That, of course, you can't lint. But yeah, there are some of those things that are caught automatically, and I'm really happy actually for it. So why not?
Thank you for this.